The giant crystal room was so big that 100 elephants could fit inside it easily. The walls were made of some kind of blue stone that glowed softly and made everyone look like they were underwater. 12 different types of alien creatures sat in tall chairs arranged in a perfect circle around the center, where one human man stood alone. Ambassador Kong. Daeho looked around at all the strange faces staring down at him. Some had too many eyes, others had no eyes at all. The Velian Chancellor was the biggest one there, with blue skin that looked like it was made of rubber and for long arms that moved like snakes. His voice was deep and scary when he spoke here. "People have exactly 72 hours to do what we tell you," the Chancellor said, his 4 arms pointing at Daeho like weapons. "You will give us all your fighting ships. You will break down all your space stations that protect your planets, and you will let us control everything you do. This is not something we are asking. This is something you must." Daeho stood very straight in his black uniform that had small silver buttons and a badge that showed the Earth with stars around it. He was not a tall man, but he looked strong, and his eyes were calm, even though he was surrounded by creatures that could probably eat him for breakfast. His helper, Yoon Hae-rin, stood behind him, whispering into a small device that would send messages back to Earth faster than light could travel. Behind the Chancellor sat other alien leaders. The Zephyrian Trade Minister looked like a giant bug with wings that sparkled like glass and made buzzing sounds when she was excited. The Corellian War Chief had skin like a lizard and teeth that were too sharp and too many. The Altarian representative was the strangest of all, looking like he was made of living crystal that changed colors when he moved. "Respected council members," Daeho said, and his voice carried clearly through the huge room, even though he was not shouting. "Humanity thanks you for your concern about keeping peace in the galaxy. However, we must politely say no to your kind offer." The room exploded with noise. Every alien started talking at once in their own language. Some made clicking sounds, others whistled, and a few made noises that sounded like metal being bent. The translation machines worked hard to change all the different languages into words that everyone could understand, but there were so many voices that it sounded like a storm of angry birds. The Zephyrian minister flew up from her chair, her wings beating so fast they made a humming sound. "You cannot say no," she buzzed loudly. "Lesser species do not refuse the council. Young races must obey their elders." Daeho smiled, and somehow that simple smile made several of the alien leaders move back in their chairs, even though they were much bigger and stronger than he was. "Lesser species," he said quietly, "perhaps you have the wrong information about what humanity really is. We have been watching you all, learning about you, studying how you think and act. Did you really believe we would just lie down and let you walk all over us because you said please?" The Chancellor stood up, and he was so tall that his head almost touched the glowing ceiling. "Your people only learned how to travel between stars 50 years ago," he shouted, waving all 4 arms around like he was conducting an orchestra. "You are babies compared to our great civilizations. The Altarian Empire has ruled space for 3,000 years. The Velian hegemony has controlled trade routes since before your planet had seen this end." "Yet," Daeho replied softly, "here you all are shaking with fear at the thought of what we might do next. Tell me, honored Chancellor, when was the last time any of your member species actually fought a real war? When did you last face an enemy that did not immediately give up when you showed them your big guns and fancy technology?" The silence that followed was so complete that everyone could hear the soft humming of the room's air systems and the gentle glow of the crystal walls. Hae-rin looked at her communication device and nodded to Daeho. The message from Earth was short and clear. Operation Defiance was ready to begin. Looked around the circle of alien faces and saw something in their eyes that surprised him. It was not anger or disgust like he had expected. It was fear, real honest fear. These creatures who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years were actually afraid of what humans might do. "You see, the problem is," Daeho continued, his voice still calm and friendly, "you have all gotten used to everyone being scared of you. When you tell a species to give up their weapons, they do it when you tell them to. Stop expanding to new planets, they obey. When you demand their best and brightest people come work for you, they send them without question." Corellian War Chief leaned forward, his lizard eyes glowing red with anger. "That is how civilization works." He hissed through his sharp teeth, "The strong lead, the weak follow order must be maintained." "Well, what happens?" Daeho asked. "When you meet someone who is not weak, what happens when you meet a species that looks at your threats and says, 'We do not think'?" So what happens when you try to bully someone who cannot be bullied? The Chancellor tried to look confident, but his skin was changing color from blue to purple, which Deho knew meant he was getting very upset. You think your primitive weapons can stand against our advanced technology? You think your few hundred ships can fight our thousands? You are delusional. Deho laughed, and it was not a mean laugh, but it was not a happy one either. Primitive weapons, he repeated, slowly. You know what is funny about that word primitive? Our ancestors used primitive sticks and stones to hunt animals 10 times their size. They used primitive boats to cross oceans that no one had ever crossed before. They used primitive flying machines to soar through skies that everyone said were impossible to conquer the human. Ambassador walked closer to the center of the circle so that all the aliens had to look down at him. Primitive does not mean weak, he said clearly. Primitive means we have not forgotten how to fight, how to struggle, how to survive. When was the last time any of your species had to fight for their lives? When did you last have to choose between victory or death? Rin stepped forward and whispered something in Deho's ear. He nodded and looked back up at the council members. 72 hours, he announced, straightening his jacket and checking his watch. That gives us plenty of time to show you what primitive humans can do when someone tries to push them around the Altarian. Crystal being flashed bright red, which meant he was very angry. You are making a terrible mistake, he said, in a voice like breaking glass. We offer you a chance to join galactic civilization peacefully. If you refuse, we will be forced to bring you into line by other means. Deho walked toward the exit, but stopped and looked back over his shoulder. Other means, he said, with that same quiet smile. I look forward to seeing what those might be. And just so we are completely clear, when we say no, we mean no. When we say we will not surrender, we mean we will fight to the last human standing. When we say you cannot make us do anything, we mean exactly. Va Taz, the human ambassador, walked out of the crystal chamber, followed by his aide, the alien. Leaders sat in stunned silence. They had expected fear, pleading, maybe some desperate bargaining, but they had not expected defiance. They had not expected a species that looked at their overwhelming power and simply said, we do not care how strong you think you are. 72 hours, the Chancellor whispered to himself as he watched the humans disappear through the chamber doors. In 72 hours, they would learn what happened to species that defied the Galactic Council, but deep in his heart, he was beginning to wonder if maybe this time things might be different. This time, they were not dealing with a species that wanted to join their civilization. This time, they were facing creatures who seemed perfectly happy to stand alone against the entire galaxy, and that thought scared him more than he wanted to admit. Deep beneath the busy streets of Seoul, in a room that did not officially exist, General Lee Taman stood in front of a wall of glowing screens that showed every human ship in the galaxy. The screens were so big that they covered the entire wall, from floor to ceiling, and each tiny dot of light represented a warship full of human soldiers ready to fight. The war room was like a giant cave carved out of solid rock. 50 meters underground, the air smelled of electronics and coffee, and the quiet tension that comes when people are preparing for something very dangerous. Hundreds of officers from every country on Earth worked at computer stations that beeped and hummed constantly as information flowed back and forth across space faster than light itself. General Taman was not a young man anymore. His hair was gray, and his face had lines that came from making hard decisions for many years, but his back was straight, and his eyes were sharp as he watched the tactical display that showed where every human fleet was hiding. The aliens thought they knew where all the human ships were, but they were very wrong. Status report, Taman said, in a voice that carried clearly across the busy room. Even though he spoke quietly, everyone stopped what they were doing to listen. Captain Park Sun-woo stepped forward from her position at the main tactical station. She was younger than the general, but her uniform had medals that showed she had fought in the border wars against the pirates and the first contact incidents when humanity met its first aliens. Her voice was crisp and professional as she spoke. Called. Stealth fleets are in position, sir, she reported, reading from a tablet that glowed with classified information. The Korean Ghost. Ships are hiding near the Altarian home system, using the asteroid belt to stay invisible. The American Deep Space Fleet is positioned at the main trade routes that connect the alien worlds, and the European reconnaissance ships are standing by at the communication relay stations that carry messages between star systems. Good. Taman nodded, but his expression remained serious. What about our special weapons? Dr. Kim Biora stepped out from behind a bank of computers that were processing data. So fast that the screens looked like waterfalls of numbers. She was the head of humanity's most secret research division, and she had been working for 5 years on weapons that the aliens had never seen before. Her smile was not happy, but it was very satisfied. "The quantum disruptors are ready, General," she said, holding up a small device that looked like a metal cube but hummed with contained energy. "The aliens think they know what level our technology has reached, but they have never seen what humans can build when they are angry and have something to prove a team in. Remembered the day 15 years ago when the first alien ship appeared in Earth's solar system. The ship was beautiful and peaceful, and the creatures inside seemed friendly. They offered trade and technology and cultural exchange. Everything seemed wonderful at first. Humanity was finally part of a bigger community that stretched across the stars. But slowly, things began to change. The aliens started making rules about where humans could go and what they could do. Human colonies were only allowed on certain planets that the aliens approved. Human military ships needed permission from the Galactic Council before they could travel to new systems. Human scientists and engineers were invited to alien worlds for educational programs, but somehow they never came back. Breaking point came 6 months ago when the Council demanded that humanity hand over their best and brightest people for permanent educational service. It was then that Professor Choi Jinho realized what was really happening. Humanity was not being welcomed into galactic civilization. They were being slowly absorbed and controlled. "Like a small fish being swallowed by a bigger one, sir," interrupted Lieutenant Nam Yujin from the Communications Center. "We are receiving reports from our deep space scouts. The Council is mobilizing their fleets. 12 different species with over 3,000 ships are all moving toward our outer territories." Studied the main display screen, watching as hundreds of red dots representing enemy ships began moving in formation toward human space. Each dot was a warship with enough firepower to destroy a city, and there were so many of them that they looked like a red cloud spreading across the galaxy. "They think numbers will scare us," he said quietly. "They are about to learn something very important about human beings. We have never been conquered by anyone. And we are not about to start now." Captain Sun looked worried as she counted the enemy ships. "General, our total fleet strength is only 800 vessels, even with our technological advantages. Those odds are exactly what we planned for." Finished the sentence with a slight smile. "Captain, have you ever heard the story of Admiral Yi Sun-sinif?" "Course, Sir Sun-woo," replied immediately. "He was the greatest naval commander in Korean history. He defeated a Japanese invasion fleet of over 300 ships, with only 13 of his own turtle ships. And how did he manage such an impossible victory?" Sun-woo's worried expression began to change as she understood what the general was trying to tell her. "Superior tactics, sir. Knowledge of the battlefield and the enemy's overconfidence in their own strength." Zachary Taman nodded. "The aliens have grown soft and lazy after centuries of easy victories. They have forgotten that the most dangerous enemy is not the one with the most ships or the biggest guns. It is the one who has nothing to lose and everything to prove." Around the war room, officers were working frantically to coordinate the defense of human space. But this was not just about defending. It was about something much more important. This was about proving that humanity would not bow down to anyone, no matter how powerful they claimed to be. Kimbora returned to her computer station where her team was making final adjustments to weapons that had never been tested in real combat. The quantum disruptors could pass through alien shields like they were made of paper. The stealth generators could make human ships invisible to any sensor the aliens possessed. The new engines could make human vessels appear and disappear faster than the enemy could react. But the most important weapon humanity possessed was not made of metal or energy. It was the simple, stubborn refusal to give up that had carried humans from caves to the stars. Every human ship captain knew that they were not just fighting for their lives, they were fighting for the right of their species to remain free. Woo-jin looked up from his communication station again. "Sir, we are getting reports from our agents inside alien space. The council members are arguing among themselves. Some of them think this will be easy, others are starting to worry about what humans might dull it." "Them worry," Tamin said with satisfaction. "Worry makes people make mistakes, and we will be ready to take advantage of every mistake they make." Walked over to a smaller screen that showed the positions of the alien fleets. Each group of ships was marked with symbols that indicated which species they belonged. to the Altarians with their crystal ships that could cut through almost anything, the Velians with their massive carriers that could launch thousands of fighter craft, the Zephyrians with their speed that let them attack and retreat before the enemy could respond. But General Timon was not worried about any of them he had studied. Every alien species for 15 years he knew their strengths and their weaknesses. He knew how they thought and how they fought. Most importantly, he knew that they had never faced an enemy like humanity. The countdown clock on the main wall showed 68 hours and 37 minutes until the alien ultimatum expired. In less than 3 days, the largest space battle in galactic history would begin. And despite being outnumbered more than 3-1, General Lee Timon was looking forward to it because he knew something that the aliens did not know. Humans did not fight like other species. When humans were cornered, they did not surrender. They got creative. And creative humans were the most dangerous force in the universe. Commander Zix 477 stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display with the confidence of a predator that had never known defeat his species. The Altarians had evolved from the apex hunters of a world covered in crystal mountains and seas of acid. Their ships reflected this deadly heritage, sleek, beautiful vessels that cut through space like knives. Through silk, the bridge of the Altarian command ship was a work of art made from living crystal that grew and shifted in response to the crew's thoughts. The walls pulsed with soft blue light, and the floor was smooth as glass, but somehow provided perfect grip for feet that ended in razor-sharp claws. Zix 477 himself was nearly 3 meters tall, with skin that looked like it was carved from precious gems and eyes that glowed with their own inner report. He commanded, and his voice rang through the bridge like a song made of breaking glass. His language was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like listening 2 wind chimes during an earthquake. Human fleet detected in Sector 7, Commander, replied his tactical officer, whose crystalline features shifted from blue to green as he concentrated on his instruments. Approximately 50 vessels maintaining defensive positions around their mining station. Zix 477 felt satisfaction flow through him like warm honey. His skin shifted from blue to gold, which in Altarian body language meant he was pleased with what he was hearing. 50 ships against their 300. This would be over so quickly that it would barely qualify as a real battle. Perhaps the humans would surrender once they saw the overwhelming power arrayed against them. What Commander Zix 477 did not know was that Lieutenant Colonel Seogen was watching every move from the bridge of the HSV Inchen, a stealth ship positioned just outside the range of Altarian sensors. The human vessel was completely invisible, using technology that the aliens had never encountered before. Seogen was a small man with quick eyes and hands that never stopped moving as he worked the controls of his ship. He had spent 5 years preparing for this moment, studying Altarian tactics and waiting for the chance to test human ingenuity against alien arrogance. The fleet the Altarians had detected was not what it appeared to be. Enemy is taking the bait, Seogen reported to his crew, speaking quietly into his headset. All ships initiate Phase 2's Altarian fleet moved forward in perfect formation, their ships gliding through space with the deadly grace of sharks approaching prey. Each vessel was a masterpiece of alien engineering, with weapons that could burn through the armor of any known ship and shields that had never been penetrated. In 3,000 years of warfare, as they approached firing range, Commander Zix 477 felt the familiar rush of anticipation that came before victory. His species lived for moments like this, when they could demonstrate their superiority over lesser beings. The humans had been foolish to resist the Council's generous offer. Now they would learn what happened to species that defied their betters. Prepare to fire. He commanded all ships target the human vessels. We will disable their engines first, then demand their surrender. But as the Altarian weapons began to charge, something unexpected happened. The 50 human ships suddenly exploded, but not from enemy fire. The explosions came from within, as if the ships had destroyed themselves. The alien crews watched in confusion as the human fleet turned into expanding clouds of debris and energy. Then they realized that the explosions were not random. They formed a precise geometric pattern that created a massive electromagnetic pulse wave that spread outward from the destruction like ripples in a pond. The pulse hit the Altarian fleet with the force of a stellar storm, instantly disrupting every electronic system in their ships. Impossible, Zix-477 screamed as his beautiful crystal bridge went dark, and emergency lighting bathed everything in red. The elegant controls that responded to thought became dead chunks of mineral. The tactical display that showed the position of every ship went blank. The communication systems that linked the fleet together fell silent as the Altarian ships drifted helplessly in space, their crews frantically trying to restart systems that refused to respond. The real human fleet appeared from hiding places, behind asteroids and small moons. The HSV, sole commanded by Admiral Bay Myung, led the attack with weapons that the aliens had never seen before. Admiral Myung was a woman of medium height with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had commanded ships for 20 years and had never lost a battle. Her crew trusted her completely and would follow her orders, even if it meant flying into the heart of a starfire. Quantum torpedoes, she ordered calmly. Target their engines first, then weapons, then life support systems. We want them alive to carry our message back to the Council. The quantum torpedoes were unlike any weapon the galaxy had ever seen. They passed through the Altarian shields as if the protective barriers did not exist. The torpedoes struck the alien ships, directly hitting their hull plating and causing systems to fail in cascading waves of destruction. Our shields are military-grade, Zix-477 shouted as his flagship shuddered under impacts that should not have been possible. No primitive species should be able to penetrate our defenses. These weapons do not exist in any databases. Words were cut off as the bridge erupted in sparks and his beautiful crystal walls began to crack through the chaos and smoke. He could see something that chilled his warrior heart to its core. The human ships were not attacking randomly, they moved with precision and purpose. Each vessel targeting specific systems on the Altarian ships. The engines went dark, leaving the crystal ships unable to maneuver. Then, the weapon systems failed one by one, as quantum torpedoes found their targets with impossible accuracy. Finally, the life support systems began to flicker and fail, leaving the alien crews gasping for breath in the growing cold. But the humans did not try to destroy the Altarian fleet. Instead, they methodically disabled every ship, leaving the crews alive but completely helpless. It was a demonstration of power, more terrifying than any massacre could have been. The message was clear: humanity could have killed them all, but chose not to. Within 30 minutes, 300 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy were floating dead in space, their proud crews reduced to helpless passengers waiting for rescue. The human fleet had not lost a single vessel and had barely used a fraction of their ammunition. Admiral Myung opened a communication channel to the crippled Altarian flagship. Her face appeared on screens throughout the alien fleet, calm and professional, but with eyes that held depths of steel. Commander Zix-477, she said, speaking in perfect Altarian, which shocked the alien commander even more than the defeat of his fleet. I am Admiral Bay Myung of the Human Defense Force. I want to thank you for providing such an excellent field test for our new weapon systems. How Zix-477 managed to whisper, his voice box damaged by the attack. How do you speak our language? How do you have weapons that can penetrate our shields we have been studying? You, for 15 years, Admiral Myung replied. We know your languages, your technologies, your tactics, and your weaknesses. We know that you have not fought a real war in over 1,000 years, and that you have forgotten what it means to face an enemy that fights back. Communication ended, leaving the Altarian crews alone with their thoughts and their fear. They had believed themselves to be the greatest warriors in the galaxy, unbeatable in their crystal ships, with their perfect formations and their superior technology. But in 30 minutes, a small human fleet had proven that belief to be nothing more than an illusion built on centuries of victories against opponents who surrendered before the real fighting began. Humanity had shown them what real war looked like, and the lesson was more terrifying than death itself. Vaz rescue ships arrived to collect the survivors. Commander Zix-477 stared out at the human fleet, still maintaining perfect formation around his disabled vessels. He realized that everything the Council thought they knew about humanity was wrong. These were not primitive beings with crude weapons. These were apex predators who had been hiding their true nature until the moment they chose to strike, and that moment had finally come. News of the Altarian fleet's complete defeat spread through the galaxy faster than the speed of light itself, carried by quantum communication networks that connected every civilized world. The story grew with each telling, becoming more impossible and more terrifying with every transmission in the great crystal chambers of the Galactic Council. Panic had replaced the earlier confidence like a cold wind blowing through a house of cards. Representatives from 12 species that had ruled space for thousands of years now found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. A species that not only refused to submit, but had the power to back up their defiance. Chancellor Vex Prim of the Velian hegemony paced frantically around the central podium, his 4 arms moving in agitated patterns that spoke of barely controlled terror. His blue skin had turned a sickly purple color that showed his emotional state to anyone who could read Velian body language. "This is impossible," he kept repeating, his voice rising higher with each word. "Our intelligence reports said the humans had primitive kinetic weapons and basic energy shields. They should not be able to defeat our most powerful fleet with such ease." Ambassador Quintal of the Zeridian Collective floated above her station like a jellyfish, made of living crystal, her normally calm surface now pulsing with agitated colors that shifted from red to orange to yellow. In rapid succession, she spoke in harmonics that the translation machines struggled to convert into words. "Other species could understand they have been deceiving us for decades," she chimed her voice. "While pretending to be a young, primitive species, this level of deception requires planning and patience that spans generations." The chamber's main display suddenly activated without warning, showing the calm, professional face of Admiral Baemia. Aboard her flagship, the human woman looked directly into the camera as if she could see each council member individually. Her expression was friendly, almost conversational, but her eyes held a hardness that made several representatives step back. From their podiums, esteemed members of the Galactic Council, Myung, began her voice, carrying clearly through the translation systems that struggled to convey the subtle menace in her tone. "I hope this message finds you in good health and spirits. I am Admiral Baemyang of the Human Defense Force, and I wanted to personally thank you for providing us with such an excellent opportunity to field test our new weapons systems." As rage overcame his fear, "You dare to mock this council," he shouted, his 4 arms gesturing wildly. "You are criminals and pirates who have attacked innocent vessels engaged in lawful activities." Admiral Myung's expression did not change even slightly, but somehow her smile became more dangerous. "Innocent," she repeated slowly. "Your innocent vessels were armed with enough firepower to reduce a populated planet to molten glass. Targeting systems locked onto our installations in human military doctrine that constitutes a clear hostile act." Myung asked quietly, and for the first time her voice carried a hint of real anger. "Did humanity have any voice in creating these laws? Were we consulted when you decided our fate and our future? Or did you simply assume that because we are newer to the galactic community, we would accept whatever terms you chose to dictate to Uzdiar Han?" Ruwan, humanity's chief diplomatic advisor, appeared beside Admiral Myung on the transmission. From the screen, like heat from a fire council members, Han began his voice, carrying the authority of someone who had spent years studying galactic politics. "Let me be absolutely clear about humanity's position going forward. We reject your claimed authority over our species. We reject your laws that we had no part in creating and no voice in shaping. And we categorically reject your fundamental assumption that technological age equals the right to rule over others." The Zephyrian Trade Minister, a insect-like creature with gossamer wings that buzzed frantically when she was agitated, rose from her perch and clicked rapidly in her native language. "You cannot simply ignore thousands of years of established galactic civilization," she buzzed. "Order must be maintained throughout the galaxy." "Order," Han repeated, with a smile that was not pleasant in any way. "You mean the order where 12 species divide up the galaxy among themselves, while keeping all others as subordinate clients? The order where you control all major trade routes, all advanced technology transfers, and all territorial expansion rights? That order?" Admiral Myung leaned forward slightly, and the simple movement somehow made her presence fill the entire council chamber. "Here's what is going to happen," she said in a voice that cut through the growing murmur of alien voices. "You are going to immediately release all human scientists and engineers that you have been holding under your so-called educational exchange programs. You are going to remove all restrictions on human travel and colonization in space, and you are going to formally acknowledge our complete..." Demanded, though, his voice shook slightly as he spoke. Then Admiral Myung replied with that same cold smile. "Their 1,500 ship armada, I would be more than happy to arrange a meeting to discuss their concerns. Chamber erupted in chaos as every representative tried to speak at once. Some demanded immediate military action, others called for negotiations, and a few suggested retreat to defensive positions. The translation machines gave up trying to sort out the babble of different languages and simply broadcast a cacophony of alien sounds. Through the noise, Dr. Han continued speaking his calm voice, somehow cutting through the confusion as if he were having a quiet conversation in an empty room. You see, the fundamental problem you face is your civilization. They want access to your technology. They want protection from enemies or economic opportunities. But humanity wants none of those things. Han smiled, and it was genuinely friendly, which somehow made it even more terrifying. We are perfectly capable of defending ourselves, as you have just discovered. We can develop our own technology as we have been doing in secret for decades, and we have no desire whatsoever to join a civilization based on the systematic oppression of younger species. The transmission continued for another 10 minutes, with Admiral Myung and Dr. Han calmly explaining exactly how the galaxy was going to change, whether the Council liked it or not. They spoke of trade routes that would be opened to all, species technology sharing that would become mandatory, instead of conditional, and territorial expansion that would no longer require Council approval. But the most shocking moment came when Han announced that 6 other species had already contacted humanity requesting assistance in gaining their independence from Council, controlled the Maldorian Republic, the Thraxian mining guilds, the Nexus colonies, and 3 others had secretly agreed to support human demands for galactic reform. When the transmission finally ended, the Council chamber sat in stunned silence. No species in recorded history had ever spoken to them with such casual disrespect. No one had ever made demands instead of requests. No one had ever threatened them with consequences for refusing to comply. Chancellor Vexbrim looked around at his fellow council members and saw fear in every alien face. They had believed themselves to be the masters of the galaxy, untouchable in their power and authority, but in one brief transmission, humanity had revealed that belief to be nothing more than a comfortable illusion. The humans were not asking for a place at the table. 3 days after the stunning defeat of the Altarian fleet, the Galactic Council faced the worst crisis in their 3,000-year history. The carefully constructed order that had kept them in power for millennia was crumbling like a sandcastle. Hit by ocean wave, species that had been loyal, obedient clients for centuries were suddenly asking. Emergency session chamber was larger than the regular meeting hall, with room for representatives from every known species in the galaxy. Most of the seats were empty, because most species had never been invited to participate in galactic governance. But today, everything was different. Today, the excluded species had been invited to witness the birth of a new order. Ambassador Kong Daeho stood once again in the center of the Great Chamber, but this time he was not alone. Representatives from 6 other species flanked him like bodyguards, each one a civilization that had been considered junior members or client states by the ruling council. Their presence sent a clear message. Humanity was not acting alone anymore. The Maldorian representative was a tall, graceful being with scaled skin that shifted color with his emotions and gills that fluttered when he was excited. His species had been providing raw materials to Council worlds for 800 years in exchange for protection and limited technology. Sharing the Thraxian delegate looked like a cross between a bear and a robot with thick fur covering cybernetic implants that enhanced his natural strength. His people were master miners and engineers. Colonies had sent a human-like representative, but with silver skin and eyes that glowed with their own inner light. Her people were descendants of multiple species who had intermarried over centuries, creating a new hybrid civilization that the Council barely tolerated. "This is absolutely intolerable," screeched the Avian Prime Minister, a bird-like creature whose rainbow feathers were puffed up in an aggressive display that made him look twice his normal size. "You are encouraging open rebellion against legitimate galactic authority." Captain Li Yun-jae, recently promoted after her brilliant tactical work in what humans were calling the Centauri engagement, stepped forward with the confident stride of someone who had proven herself in battle. Her uniform bore new decorations that marked her as a hero of the Human Defense Force. "With respect, Prime Minister," Yun-ji said in a voice that carried no respect at all, "we are encouraging independence and self-determination. There is a significant the difference between rebellion and liberation." The crystalline hegemon, A being made entirely of living mineral that communicated through patterns of colored light flashed angry reds and oranges across his translucent body, the Council has maintained galactic peace and stability for 3,000 years, he said through speakers that converted his light patterns into audible words. Peace. Of younger species, the resource extraction quotas that keep developing worlds in permanent poverty. The forced labor programs disguised as educational exchanges. Ambassador Deho raised his hand for silence, and the chamber immediately quieted down. The simple fact that he could command attention so easily showed how much had changed in just a few days. Honored. Council members. Deho began, his voice carrying clearly through. The vast space humanity does not seek to destroy galactic civilization. We simply refuse to accept the premise that our destiny and the destiny of every other species should be decided by a small group of self-appointed overlords. The Maldorian representative stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice sounded, "We will govern ourselves according to our own laws, customs, and values." Effective immediately, a chorus of similar declarations followed, like dominoes falling in sequence. The Thraxian mining guilds announced their independence and their intention to sell their services to the highest bidder, regardless of Council approval. The Nexus colonies declared complete self-governance and opened their borders to any species seeking refuge from Council oppression. The Frontier Worlds Alliance, representing dozens of small settlements on the edge of known space, rejected all Council authority and announced their intention to expand into unclaimed territory without asking permission. The Rimrunners, a loose confederation of traders and explorers, declared their trade routes open to all species on equal terms. Chancellor Vexprime's forearms trembled with barely controlled rage as he watched centuries of careful control slip away like water through his fingers. "You are destroying everything," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "Without the Council, there will be chaos, warfare, suffering beyond imagination." Professor Kim Hyjin, humanities leading expert on galactic politics and social structures, laughed softly, but the sound carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "You mean there will be competition," she said with obvious amusement. "Free markets instead of carefully controlled monopolies, innovation instead of technological stagnation, choice instead of dictated compliance. You are naive." The Chancellor spat, his blue skin now almost black with fury. "Lesser species cannot govern themselves effectively. They lack the wisdom, the experience, the moral authority to make decisions that affect the entire galaxy." The arrogance, Deho suggested quietly. "Chancellor, humanity has been observing your wise governance for 15 years. We have seen how you handle dissent, how you treat those you consider inferior." As every council member tried to speak at once, threats were made, promises of destruction were hurled, and demands for immediate surrender filled the air. But through the chaos, Captain Li Yunji's communication device chimed with an urgent message. She listened for a moment, then smiled with the expression of someone who had been expecting good news. "Ambassador," she said loudly enough to be heard over the arguing, "I have just received word from Admiral Park. The Council's emergency response fleet is moving toward human space. 700 ships from 5 different species, including their elite guard units." Color, but his eyes remained fixed on the human delegation. "We gave you every opportunity to be reasonable," he said in a voice that tried to sound confident but carried an undertone of desperation. Ho straightened his shoulders and looked around at each council member in turn. "So you did," he replied calmly, "and now you are going to learn what happens when humans stop being reasonable and start being efficient." That they were witnessing the end of one era and the beginning of another. The old order, based on fear and submission, was dying. The new order, based on strength and independence, was being born. Professor Kim stepped forward with a tablet in her hands that showed real-time positions of ships throughout the galaxy. "The Council's emergency fleet is impressive," she said conversationally. Directly at Chancellor Vexprim, however, I should mention that our deep space reconnaissance shows another interesting development. 18 additional species have contacted us in the past 72 hours, requesting assistance in achieving independence from Council oversight. The revelation hit the chamber like a physical blow. 18 more species meant that nearly half of all known civilizations were now questioning Council authority. The carefully constructed empire that had taken millennia to build was collapsing in a matter of days. But what truly terrified the Council members was not the number of defecting species. Most species would be panicking at the thought of facing such overwhelming force. Instead, the humans seemed almost eager for the confrontation, as if they had been planning for exactly this moment, and that thought was more frightening than any weapon or threat could ever be. 2 weeks after what historians would later call the Battle of Seven Fleets, the wreckage of the Council's emergency, Armada drifted silently through the void between stars like a monument to the futility of oppression. Admiral Park Gun-ho stood on the bridge of the HSV Busan, watching through the main view screen as human rescue ships carefully pulled survivors from the disabled. Alien vessels. The battle had lasted only 4 hours, but those 4 hours had changed the galaxy forever. 700 of the most advanced warships ever built, representing 5 different species and 3,000 years of military tradition, now floated helplessly in space, their crews alive, but their ships completely powerless. Admiral Park was a man who had spent his entire career preparing for this moment. He had studied every alien military doctrine, analyzed every possible tactical scenario, and planned for every contingency. But even he had been surprised by how completely the human victory had been achieved. Final casualty report, Admiral, announced Commander Yukine from her station at the tactical display. Enemy losses, 0. Personnel killed, approximately 15,000 wounded. All 700 ships disabled and powerless. Our losses, 3 vessels with minor damage, 47 personnel wounded, 0. Fatalities. Park nodded with deep satisfaction. The new quantum weapons had performed exactly as designed, devastating to alien technology, but completely harmless to living beings. It was a uniquely human approach to warfare, achieving total victory while minimizing bloodshed and preserving life whenever possible. The quantum torpedoes had passed through alien shields like they were made of paper. The stealth generators had made human ships appear and disappear faster than enemy sensors could track. The new engines had allowed human vessels to strike from impossible angles and retreat before the aliens could respond. But more than the technology, it was the tactics that had won the day. Human commanders had studied alien psychology for decades and knew exactly how each species would react under pressure. The proud Altarians had charged straight into carefully prepared ambushes. The methodical Velians had tried to maintain formation even as their ships were picked off. One by one, the aggressive Corellians had abandoned their support vessels to pursue phantom targets that led them into trap after trap. On the main display, a communication channel opened, showing the face of President Moon Jae-in speaking from the newly constructed Galactic Assembly Hall on Earth. Behind him stood representatives from over 50 different species, not just the traditional council members, but also the smaller civilizations that had been excluded from galactic governance for millennia. Admiral Park, the president, began, his voice carrying the weight of history. The Galactic Democratic Assembly has formally voted to establish new protocols for interspecies relations effective immediately. All sentient species, regardless of their technological level or the age of their civilization, will have equal representation in galactic affairs. The changes that followed were sweeping and revolutionary. The old council's monopoly on faster-than-light travel routes was broken open, allowing any species to use the ancient stargates that connected distant worlds. Technology sharing became mandatory rather than conditional, with advanced species required to help developing ones. Rather than exploiting them, trade agreements were renegotiated on completely equal terms with small species, no longer forced to accept unfavorable deals simply because they lacked military power. The forced labor programs, disguised as educational exchanges, were immediately terminated, and all detained individuals were returned to their home worlds with full compensation. Most importantly, the principle of species sovereignty was established as the fundamental law of galactic civilization. No species could impose its will on another without unanimous consent from the entire galactic community. War was not banned, but it was regulated with strict protocols for engagement and mandatory mediation. Services. Dear On So-young, now serving as humanity's first Secretary General of Interspecies Affairs, appeared beside the president on the transmission. Her appointment had been approved by representatives from every known species, making her the first person in galactic history to hold office with truly universal support. The former council members have agreed to these terms, she announced, in exchange for the return of their disabled fleets and the establishment of mutual defense agreements. It seems they have finally realized that cooperation is significantly more effective than domination. In achieving long-term stability, Admiral Park smiled as he watched the rescued alien crews being transferred to hospital ships, where human medical teams worked alongside alien doctors. To treat the wounded, many of the aliens looked confused and suspicious, unable to understand why their captors were treating them with such care and respect. The concept of honorable victory winning completely while maintaining moral superiority was apparently foreign to most galactic species for thousands of years. Warfare had meant total destruction of the enemy with survivors enslaved or eliminated, but humanity had introduced a new paradigm: victory without vengeance, strength without cruelty. Admiral, interrupted Lieutenant Kong Min-ho from the communication station. We are receiving a priority transmission from the Altarian homeworld. The display switched to show Commander Zix 477, his crystalline features somehow managing to convey deep humility despite their alien nature. His ship had been among the first disabled in the battle, and he had spent 2 weeks in human custody being treated with courtesy that he had never expected. Admiral Park, he began, his voice carrying none of its former arrogance. I am authorized to speak for the Altarian Empire in its entirety. We wish to formally apologize for our previous hostile actions and to request the establishment of diplomatic relations with humanity based on mutual respect and equality. Request granted, Park replied immediately. Commander, humanity does not hold grudges against those who learn from their mistakes and demonstrate genuine desire for peaceful coexistence. We look forward to working with your people in building a better galactic community. As the transmission ended, Commander Yu approached with a thoughtful expression on her face. Sir, do you think it will last, this new system we are creating? Park considered the question carefully as he watched human and alien medical teams working side by side to help the wounded. The old system had lasted for 3,000 years, but it was based on fear and oppression. Species stayed in line because they were afraid of punishment, but fear only works until someone comes along who is not afraid, and humanity is not afraid. Commander Yu asked To. We are terrified, Park admitted with a quiet laugh. But we have learned something very important about fear. It is most powerful when you use it to motivate yourself to become better rather than to control others and keep them down. The old council used their strength to dominate and oppress. We are using our strength to liberate and uplifting the weeks that followed. The galaxy began to change in ways that no one had anticipated. Species that had been bitter enemies for centuries suddenly found common ground in their shared desire for independence and self-determination. Technologies that had been restricted for millennia became available to everyone who wanted to learn. Trade routes that had been controlled by the Council for thousands of years opened to vessels from all species, creating unprecedented economic opportunities. The ancient stargates that had been jealously guarded by the ruling elite now welcomed ships from the smallest frontier colonies. There were problems, of course. Some species tried to exploit the new freedoms for conquest or economic exploitation. Others struggled to adapt to the concept of equality after centuries of either dominating or being dominated. But the Galactic Democratic Assembly, with humanity providing quiet but firm leadership, proved surprisingly effective at maintaining order without oppression. The former council members, initially resentful of their reduced status, gradually began to appreciate the benefits of the new system. The Altarians discovered that their warrior culture was perfectly suited to serving as peacekeepers and protectors of smaller species, found that their organizational skills made them excellent mediators and administrators. The Zephyrians became the galaxy's most effective trade facilitators, using their speed and agility to carry goods and messages between distant worlds. The other former council species found new roles that used their strengths without requiring them to oppress others and humanity. They became what they had always been best at, being the species that refused to accept that things had to remain the same. Because they had always been that way, the species that looked at an impossible situation and asked the simple question, why not? The Galactic Council had trembled when humans rejected their negotiations, and they had been absolutely right to do so, because in that rejection lay the seeds of something far more dangerous than any rebellion or revolution. It was the birth of hope that things could be better, and the unshakable determination to make them so. In the end, it was not humanity's advanced weapons that changed the galaxy. It was not their superior tactics or their technological innovations. It was their stubborn refusal to accept that might makes right. and their absolute insistence that every sentient being deserves the right to determine their own destiny. And once that idea took hold, spreading from world to world and species to species, no force in the universe could stop it from transforming every corner of known space.